generally it takes between 2 and 6 years, I'd say. That's generally what it takes. And during that time, you're living on, very little money, £35 a week roughly. You're not allowed to work. You're not allowed to travel. You're living in accommodation that's provided for you that's often very poor quality, 3-4 people in a room. It's not pleasant whilst you wait. And so I don't know if you saw today, there was a kind of story in the Daily Mail by some Tory MP saying, this is why people want to come, because they get a 4-star hotel and a mobile phone and cash in hand. They don't even get cash in hand. First of all, it's 35 quid a week, but it's on a card to stop people buying luxuries. You're not allowed to buy tobacco on that. You're not allowed to buy alcohol. You're only allowed to buy the things you absolutely need to physically survive. So you might have to do this for 2 to 6 years. It's quite a long time, for any of us to survive that. So, there's lots and lots of problems with the asylum system, not just in the UK, but everywhere. But this idea that kind of people pitch up and it's like, you just kind of get the golden egg. I tell you, it couldn't be any further from the truth. Really, it really couldn't.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for tuning in. Before we get started, I just have a few short messages. First off, don't forget to like, share and subscribe this podcast. It's the best way to help us grow and help me get on bigger and better guests. Also, don't forget you can pre-order my book, To the Moon, The GameStop Saga, right now by following the links in the description below. We've also got a few quick sponsors for the show today. Comedy is a really crucial art form, especially in a world where government power seems to be rapidly expanding. It's one of the most effective ways to speak truth to power. And to that end, today I bring you the Behind the Bits podcast with Scott Curtis, a podcast about the tragedy and triumph of stand-up comedy. Every week, Scott has a new comedian on the show to talk about inspiration for their comedy, the struggles of the industry, and how they find themselves stumbling into the world of comedy. In one of my favourite recent episodes, Scott spoke to Liz Mail, a New Jerseyite who began comedy at 16. The show can swing between hilariously funny and incredibly poignant at times. She spoke about realising the problems you had as a child in retrospect, smoking weed as a waitress, mental health, breaking rules, and the wild rollercoaster of performing on stage. You'll get Behind the Bits wherever you find your podcast. Apple, Spotify, and more. That's Behind the Bits with Scott Curtis, the best podcast to get to know the people behind the jokes. Cryptocurrencies are all the rage these days. Over 100 million people now own cryptocurrency. Some for the memes, some for the long-term value, and some for the underlying technology. But there hasn't been a coin or token that has emerged yet that truly replaces cash or currency. This is where Dash comes in. Dash is digital cash, a user-focused cryptocurrency which you can spend anywhere, anytime, and any amount for fees less than 1 cent. With hashtag DashDirect, people can spend their Dash at over 155,000 major US retailers and get a discount and money back into their Dash wallet. No banks, no fiat, just pure crypto, with an average saving of 5%. Anyone can participate in the network, and Dash is widely available for purchase around the world. The ingenious Masternode network means sending any sum of money around the world is as simple as tapping your phone at your local grocery store. So you can say goodbye to slow transactions, complex international account numbers, and high transaction fees. Dash gives you the freedom to move your money any way you want. Grab a coffee, split a check, or pay your phone bill. Dash moves money anywhere to anyone instantly for less than a cent. Links for everything will be in the description below. So check them out and then please enjoy the podcast.
Sure.
Get going.
Sure.
Okay, so I believe we're started. Lovely. Yeah. Okay, great. So hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Chatter. Today I'm here with Professor Heaven Crawley. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's very, very much a pleasure to be here.
No problem. So you're here basically to walk us through the I don't want to say migrant crisis, that's playing into the narrative about it, but all of the headlines about the apparent crisis of migrants crossing the channel. And so why don't you give people an idea of who you are and what your expertise is before we dive into this?
You broke up a bit there. Why don't I give people an idea of what? Sorry?
Who you are and your expertise.
Oh, who I am. Well, that's the easy part. My name's Heaven Crawley. I'm a professor of international migration at Coventry University. I also direct the MIDEC Hub, which is the world's largest migration research project, looking at migration in the global south, which is where most migration takes place. But I think your point about crisis is very interesting because, in fact, the numbers of people coming to Europe and the UK are absolutely tiny compared to the numbers of people seeking asylum in other parts of the world. I think that's probably the first misconception, is that everyone imagines that everyone's, coming to the UK or coming to Europe, and the numbers in Europe and the UK are much smaller than elsewhere in the world.
Okay, so why don't we start with what is the cause of this? Yeah, of the people where are the people who are seeking asylum coming from?
Well, they're coming from a number of countries that have, to be honest, been the producers of refugees for a pretty long time. Now, you won't be surprised when I tell you what they are. Afghanistan, Syria, Iran, Eritrea, parts of West Africa, countries which are pretty much unstable in terms of their their kind of political situation and the conflict, but also tied in with that is usually huge economic insecurity. So one of the problems we have is we often try to distinguish between refugees and migrants, and in fact in law you kind of have to do that. But in reality, in my experience of doing research, and I did interviews with 500, or my team did interviews with 500 people who were arriving during the 2015 so-called crisis. People are coming from situations of conflict, but often the reason why they've moved is because, they've lost their job, they can't buy food for their family anymore. You might say that's an economic reason, but it's an economic driver situated in a conflict context. So I think this kind of messiness of why people leave is something that's often kind of ignored. But the countries primarily that people are coming from, they're not countries that you'd go on your holiday, or even necessarily that you'd get to, frankly. Those people may have left those countries years before they arrive in Europe, because what they often do is they just immediately move over the border to try and get safe, or they may even move within the country to try and get safe. And then once they're kind of safe or away from the immediate problem, then they've got to work out what to do with the rest of their lives. And that includes the lives of their children who they're often traveling with. So, most of the people we talk to who come to Europe, they've been out of their country of origin for years, certainly months, often years, trying to work out where best they can rebuild their lives. So by the time they get to France, France is not the first place where they could claim asylum. It's a bit of a problem when you look only at France, because they're not flying to France and then claiming asylum in France. I mean, that's not what's going on here. So, I think the journeys are really messy and really complicated, and that's part of the problem. People often move, for example, across the border from Syria to Lebanon or to Jordan. Then they find themselves in a situation with literally millions of refugees in the case of Lebanon. And they've got no food, they've got no possibility to work, they've got no education for their children. Why would you leave everything you had to make a better life and then be in a situation where you can't make a better life? So basically people at some point, an opportunity comes along, or they think, well, there's never going to be a future for me here, I'm going to try and somewhere else. And that's what they do. They move from place to place looking for a place to be safe. UK is often at the end of the road.
Okay, so when people are coming through Europe from somewhere around the Middle East generally, and they're arriving into, say, Italy, Greece, somewhere along the Mediterranean coast, or somewhere there, and then they're moving across Europe. Then they're either going to a lot of people are going to Germany, they're taking a lot of refugees, or they're coming to France, and eventually a small portion, but a portion are trying to cross the channel to the UK. What is their legal status when they're in Europe? I hate using the word they, because they're people, but like, what is what is the status in Europe? Like, have they got like asylum seeker status somewhere else in Europe, or are they sort of okay?
It really depends, because there is no obligation under international law to claim asylum anywhere in particular. You know, you claim asylum in the place where you think you'll be safe, and for different people that'll be different places. So there isn't any obligation to apply for asylum anywhere in particular under international law. But what the European Union did, I don't remember exactly the date, but about a decade ago, was basically decided that once you got into Europe, you had to claim asylum at the first place that you came to, where you could access a process. And they introduced something called the Dublin regulation, which meant that if you then went to claim asylum in another place, you could be returned back to the place where you'd originally claimed asylum, or what they call a safe third country. Now, in reality, people often find it really difficult to be able to access the asylum process in some places, partly because the authorities, frankly, make it quite difficult, but also because, you know, they don't have any resources, they can't speak the language. All of those things mean that they may not claim asylum in that place, but also they may decide that that's not the right place for them. You know, if I was an asylum seeker, if I was a refugee, I can't speak any languages apart from English, a little bit of Italian, not much. I would go to a place where I could speak the same language, where I thought I had a possibility of being able to integrate more quickly. And if I had friends or family or connections in that place, that is also somewhere I would go, because I would imagine that those people that I know would help me to integrate. Maybe, you know, put me up for a while, introduce me to people, show me around the system, meet with my kids and help them to get into school. So I think if people have got connections in the UK for some reason, and we know that many of the people in Calais who are coming over the channel have got connections, you know, there are children there who've got parents in the UK, then those people have a motivation, a really strong motivation to move to the place where they think they will be safest and where they think they can rebuild their lives. So, you know, it's a combination of complicated procedures and systems that people don't necessarily know about, but also reasons for people moving on. If people could claim asylum and immediately get protection and get what they need, they wouldn't move on. But the point is that they can't, and that's why they do. And that's why some people end up trying to come to the UK. But it is some. I mean, the vast majority of people don't come to the UK. It has one of the lowest rates of asylum seeking in Europe. So, you know, it's definitely not the case that everyone's coming to the UK. But those that do, in my experience, and I've interviewed lots of people about this, have some reason. Either it's language or it's family, or frankly, they've been told by the smuggler that if they pay a bit more money, they'll get a better deal. That doesn't mean they will, but they've been told that they will, and they trust what they're being told. You know, as you and I would if we were in that situation, because what else do we have to work on?
Yeah. I mean, desperation drives people to trust people they probably shouldn't, I think, is the moral there. So I want to come back to sort of more Britain specific laws and how people go about seeking asylum. But maybe it would be useful to get like a definition for people who have maybe heard like asylum seeker and seeking asylum bashed around. Like, what does that mean? And like, what are the sort of international definitions of how and why people can seek asylum?
So basically, the idea of being able to seek asylum comes from a convention that was set up just after the Second World War, when basically Europe had a huge sense, it came from Europe. Europe had a huge sense of guilt about what had happened to the Jews during the Holocaust. And so in order to prevent that ever happening again, in order to prevent a situation where Jews were being turned away from countries because they weren't seen as being genuinely in need of protection, and then they went off to the gas chambers. In order to stop that happening, they set up the 1951 Refugee Convention. And it's a very long document, but there's essentially one paragraph that matters. And that paragraph says, you are a refugee if you are outside your country of origin, you can't be protected in your country of origin, and you are in fear of your life or in some way in fearing harm because of a number of different reasons. It could be your race, your religion, your colour, your political opinion, or something called your social group, which is a quite vague term that's being disputed legally. Essentially, if you're outside of your country and you don't feel you can be safe, you have the right, under international law, international human rights law, to apply for somebody else to protect you. And once you do that, once you go into a system, you become an asylum seeker. Now, lots of people can't apply for asylum because they don't have access to the systems. They would still probably call themselves refugees because they are being forced to move, but they're not in the system, so they're not an asylum seeker. You're an asylum seeker if you're seeking asylum, and that's a legal process. If you are granted asylum, then you kind of become a legal refugee in the sense that your rights have now been recognised and your need for protection has been recognised. But that's a very long process in many different contexts. And so, this kind of asylum seeker is someone looking for protection. Refugees have got protection, but refugees are also those people who are kind of not in the system in a sense because nobody knows whether they need protection because they haven't had a chance to apply for it. So it is pretty complicated, but it is really critical to remember that it's a right under international human rights law. You have it, I have it. If someone persecutes me, and people have sought asylum from the UK or from Ireland and they've gone to the US and sought protection, I can do it, you can do it, because that's a law that exists for all of us. It's just that we're very privileged. We're very lucky that we don't live in a situation that at this moment in time needs that. But if we'd lived in Europe and we were Jewish, 50, 60 years ago, we might need to have that too. So it's designed to protect anybody who needs it in a situation where their countries can't protect them, or worse still, are actually persecuting them, which is, of course, also what happens. But the really important thing to remember, and this I don't think many people realise, is you cannot apply for asylum until you get to the country you want to seek protection from. So if you're a Somali and you want to claim asylum in France, you have to get to France. If you're an Eritrean and you want to claim asylum in the UK, you have to get to the UK. You can't go to the British embassy in somewhere in Addis or in a country where you've come from and say, I would like to claim asylum under international refugee law. You have to get there first. And that's the problem, because in order to get there, you probably have to hire the service of a smuggler, break various different, laws in terms of crossing borders illegally. And by the time you get to the place where you're trying to claim asylum, you're an asylum seeker, but you've also effectively kind of irregularly or illegally entered the border because there's no other way of doing it.
That's a difficult problem. That sounds like a really difficult problem to solve, because then you would get in times
solvable
of
political will.
Okay. Well, right. Okay. So say, just like, for example, take Syria, or take Afghanistan for example.
Yeah.
And like there was when the crisis was happening there, when the US sort of pulled out with let's not go there, but anyway, they left and left a mess in their wake. If you were able to apply for asylum by going to the embassy, would that not cause like an absolute swarming and swamping of embassies in times of crisis? And again, this is not to say that I don't believe that people don't have rights to try and because I would hope that I would have the same right, and I would want that to happen if I was in their position. But how can you try to reform that system without just swamping the embassies of different countries in sort of more unstable places?
Well, I mean, that's exactly what happened, of course. Tens of thousands of people went to the airport in Kabul and tried to get out. And many of them are still there, frankly. But I mean, there's no easy answer in terms of numbers. But first of all, most people don't leave unless they absolutely have to. I mean, you wouldn't, it's a kind of last hope, desperate situation. But the alternative, I suppose, it's very easy to say, well, that would be very difficult for people to handle. But the alternative is what we have, which is people then pay people to transport them illegally in the backs of lorries, dying in the Sahara. I mean, the stories you hear about this stuff is not just in the Mediterranean or the Channel. The stuff that happens on land is often even, well, you can't really say better or worse, but, I've heard some horrific stories about land travel too, because people don't have any choices. So that's the alternative. It's not that people going to embassies seeking asylum would be an easy or straightforward answer, but then neither's the alternative. The point is, if people need protection and there's a right under international law to get it, then it's a duty, I think, of the rest of us to come up with a strategy for how that happens, not to kind of blame refugees or asylum seekers for doing what they can to be able to access it, which is essentially what we're looking at. People are being punished. People are being vilified for trying to access something to which they are legally entitled. That's the bottom line, because we refuse to set up any alternative system. So, I mean, I don't think that, the points you made are very reasonable, but I don't think I like what we have currently. I think I would prefer to try to find an alternative than just accept that this is the only deal, because I don't think it's a deal that works for anybody. It doesn't work for refugees, doesn't work for governments, and doesn't work for, Joe Public, who's frankly pissed off with the fact that they feel that these things are out of control. So surely it's better to come up with something that works better for everybody than keep on at the same thing that we know is never going to work, because it's never going to work. There will always be conflicts. There will always be people moving. What are we going to do about it? Just carry on as we are? It just seems to me crazy that we don't want to make things better for all of us, frankly. Excuse my language. But,
No, don't worry. Trust me. You've not got the worst. Yeah, you've not got the worst language of people who come on this show. Me included.
It's a frustrating situation, essentially, because I've been doing this research now for 30 years, and I know what the solutions are. They're not straightforward, they're not easy, but no one's even prepared to talk about them. They just want to say, let's build more walls, put more CCTV cameras in place, put a net across the channel. I mean, these are just ridiculous ideas, a wave machine in the channel. These are the kinds of ideas that are being touted that get nowhere even close to the crux of what's going on here. They're very simple solutions, because they're not solutions, they're a nonsense, but they're simple ideas that don't work, and then they're seen not to work, and then governments get attacked again and people get even more pissed off, and here we are. You talk about the current crisis with the channel. I was working in the Home Office in 2001 when the Songat crisis was happening. Then again, we had the crisis with the jungle. This is not new. It's just that people are not prepared to really grapple with the bottom line of what we need to do to solve it, because they're politically, I don't know what they are, politically unambitious, but also always thinking about the next vote. And the bottom line is that this is not going to get anybody any votes, because it doesn't work. Full stop. It doesn't work for anybody. And I can't understand why people aren't prepared to take a slightly longer term view of this.
Yeah, so you're essentially saying that the ultimate solution is to stop all war and conflict, and that's not going to happen. Therefore, we have to deal with the messy sort of fallout. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. It's not going to happen.
Well,
people are going to carry on moving. So what are you going to do about it? Are we going to just keep building bigger walls and more prisons, and spending more money on guards that are policing the beaches? I mean, we look at what happened in the States, is still happening in the States. You can build as big a wall as you like, but there's always a place where it can't be built because of mountains, or, it's very remote, or people climb over it. I mean, this is just, it's not even an elastoplast on a problem, frankly. It's just spending money and wasting resources on something that can never solve the problem it's designed to address. That's what frustrates me.
Yeah, I can understand why that would be frustrating, having worked in this field as long as you have. I'm
absolutely
not particularly. It's not an area in which I've spent a lot of time delving into the specifics of it. I mean, I remember, and I still think that the way we dealt with the Syrian migrant crisis in 2012, 13, 14 was the biggest moral stain on Europe that in its history since the conception of the European Union. Essentially, I think it was abhorrent the way we dealt with it.
With the former Yugoslavia, to be honest. I mean, pretty bad with Yugoslavia too. But yeah, I think that's right. And look now at what the Syrians are managing to achieve. The Germans, as you mentioned earlier, they took the most Syrian refugees, and now they've got the highest economic growth in Europe. Why? Because they allowed those refugees to work. They allowed those refugees to use the skills that they had, and the ones that came out at the beginning had a lot of skills. And now they're doctors, and they're working in the engineering sector, and they're contributing hugely to the economic growth, and more than that, to the society more generally. So, you have to see human beings as being human beings, not just some sort of threat to your own security or your own status, because in fact those people contribute in many ways to what your society is, whether that's the economy or it's the food you eat or the music you listen to or whatever it might be. There is nothing that is uniquely English or British about any of this or anything that we do. So engaging with that history of migration that is what we are as a nation, is one of the things that politicians could be talking more about. They never talk about this stuff. They always want to talk about the negative and never about the positive aspect. And that means, understandably, that people think that refugees and migrants more generally are here just to take. And let me tell you, I've never yet met a refugee, and believe me, I've worked with thousands in my career, who wants to take. Everyone wants to work. Everyone wants to contribute. There are people who don't, as there are in every society, but it's a tiny, tiny minority. Most people just want to be safe, rebuild their lives, get their kids in school, make their dinner, the stuff that you and I, as I say, take for granted. The dehumanizing that goes on in the UK media about this is vile, and it's toxic, and it spills over into all of us, frankly.
To be honest, the media, the way the media portray it, and the way that a lot of politicians, and quite more specifically a lot of the Conservative Party and the Brexit Party, talk about this, is such a skewed view of how tolerant and accepting the British public are more broadly of people from different countries. Like one of the things that I really stunningly discovered actually during my research for my book about Brexit was that the UK is one of, if not in some measures, it depends on what polling you're looking at, one of the most accepting countries in Europe and the wider world of people from different countries and nations coming to here and living and working and getting on with their lives. Like, we're far more just tolerant generally, which is an awesome thing. And I feel like the way that the migrant crisis gets talked about just makes us all out to be bigots. And obviously those people exist, right? And there's like something that the politicians feel they can play on there. But generally, I think people are like, if someone wants to, if it was painted in the way you're laying it out, is that people want to come here and contribute and set up a life and, just live, I think we'd view it a lot differently. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I want to talk more specifically about. Sorry, what were you going to say there?
I think you're right. Is that there's this idea being bandied around by the media and politicians that people don't want migration. It's not true. As you say, the opinion polling says exactly the opposite, in fact. Not just in the UK, but everywhere. People are far more tolerant of migration than you might imagine from the way it's portrayed. But when it really pans out is like this. If you say, let's imagine you're someone who's not very kind of in favour of migration. You say, no, I don't really want there to be migrants. And then you start talking to them, as I have, about their own family, and it turns out that one of their sons is living in the States, and their daughter lives in Italy, and their cousin is married to somebody from Japan, and so it turns out that they have lots of migrants in their own family. And then when something happens in their neighbourhood, like for example a dawn raid on a family, and they want to be deported, everyone rallies around that family because they're not like other migrants. They're having this kind of demonised figure of the migrant. And they can't see that in their own family there are migrants. They themselves might be migrants. And indeed, the family living next door to them are migrants. And so it's kind of really detached from what people experience in day-to-day life, which is, let's be honest, most people just rub along. I mean, there are exceptions, but most of us just rub along in one way or the other, for better or worse. And that's a very kind of British thing, actually. But this kind of narrative about people don't want migration and don't like migrants. And when you ask people about it, they go, no, that's not me. And yet somehow this narrative still is very strong in the political and the public kind of media discourse. So it's a huge problem how people are being misrepresented, but also played in a way. And I think that's because politicians are very good at using this to detract from their own problems. It's a really good detraction. I can't get a council house. Oh, it's because of migrants, according to the government. I can't get a job. Oh, it's because of migrants, according to the government. I want a 0-hour contract. Well, actually, it's not because of migrants. It's because, capitalist enterprises trying to exploit the hell out of you. But no one wants to say those things. Everyone wants to pretend it's just the fault of the migrants. It's very easy, and it's simple, and there's no accountability. And there you go, just create a scapegoat. But, people have lots of reasons to be pretty pissed off about the quality of their lives, but I can tell you now it's not migrants that are the problem or causing it.
Yeah, definitely not. So I want to talk a little bit more specifically about what the process is for claiming asylum in the UK. So I mentioned before we started, and you said that I kind of had this wrong. That my questions were basically, when I was watching the coverage of this last night, were basically like, what is the legal method for trying to claim asylum in the UK? And why are people risking their lives ultimately? I mean, the Channel isn't quite as perilous as the Med, thankfully. But obviously, like 27 people drowned last night or 2 days ago or yesterday, whatever day it was, which is, you never want to see that, especially when it's children. That's awful. That's like human potential wasted. But what is the official route through which people should theoretically try and claim asylum in the UK, and then why is it that they're risking the journey across the Channel on the boats?
Okay, so let's talk about a little bit about the official process. So basically, in order to claim asylum, you have to make yourself known to the authorities, and you have to tell people that you want to claim asylum. So you have to, as I said earlier, you have to be able to get to the authorities to be able to tell them that. Now, some people may be in a country for other reasons, for work or students, and then the situation in their country changes. So they're already in the country. So at that point, they don't need to make a perilous journey. They just need to sort of make themselves known to the authorities and go into the asylum system. And we can come on to the asylum system. It's a very long-winded process and a very complicated and expensive one, but that's a sort of another point. So if you say, I think you said before we started this, can people not just claim asylum at the Channel? No, they can't, because they have to be in the country that they want to claim asylum. So they could claim asylum in France, but as I mentioned earlier, there might be lots of reasons why they don't want to do that, or indeed that country might make it difficult for them to do that because they don't want them to be there, as indeed they do in the UK. So if they say they arrive on the shores of Dover or Kent, they would then most likely be either picked up by or would somehow get to meet someone in the immigration authority, the border force, and they would then make their application. And in order to do that, they would first of all go through what's called a screening interview to find out where they're from and the kind of basics of their identity, like who they are. And then they would have to have a very substantive asylum interview to find out exactly what it was that they were worried about and whether or not they fit that convention in the refugee convention, that definition that I told you about in the convention earlier. So are they outside their country of origin? Are they, in need of protection from some sort of fear or harm, and all of those things? So why do they take the boat crossings? Well, they can't apply for asylum in France if they want to come to the UK. That's not an option. And interestingly, I'm sure you saw the stuff today about the French basically saying, Priti Patel, keep away. We're not happy with the way in which this is being played out. One of the things that the French are suggesting at the moment is that British immigration officials do go to France and do interview people in France in order to claim asylum in the UK, because that would then save the problem of them having to cross the Channel in order to do that. So we're back to this problem that I said before. If you have to be in the country where you want to claim asylum in order to make that application, and if there are other ways of making the claim outside of the country, then you would be able to do it. You would still have to, of course, then go through the asylum system. And I don't know the details of how long it's taking now, but generally it takes between 2 and 6 years, I'd say. That's generally what it takes. And during that time, you're living on very little money, £35 a week roughly. You're not allowed to work, you're not allowed to travel, you're living in accommodation that's provided for you that's often very poor quality, 3-4 people in a room. It's not pleasant, whilst you wait. And so I don't know if you saw today, there was a kind of story in the Daily Mail by some Tory MP saying, this is why people want to come, because they get a 4-star hotel and a mobile phone and cash in hand. They don't even get cash in hand. First of all, it's 35 quid a week, but it's on a card to stop people buying luxuries. You're not allowed to buy tobacco on that. You're not allowed to buy alcohol. You're only allowed to buy the things you absolutely need to physically survive. So you might have to do this for 2 to 6 years. It's quite a long time, for any of us to survive that. So, there's lots and lots of problems with the asylum system, not just in the UK, but everywhere. But this idea that kind of people pitch up and it's like, yeah, you just kind of get the golden egg. I tell you, it couldn't be any further from the truth. Really, it really couldn't.
2 to 6 years. Like, what is taking? What takes so long? Is it?
Well, there's lots of different problems. I mean, when I used to work at the Home Office, there was a time, it was about the beginning of the 2000s. I mean, this is not just a problem now, it's been 20 years or so. And at that point, of course, Labour was in power, not the Conservatives. At one point they found in the basement of the Home Office in Croydon, they found literally hundreds of files in boxes that had got wet, sitting in this basement somewhere, of people's asylum claims that had not been processed. Literally just not even been looked at for years because somebody had put them there and forgotten about them or whatever. I mean, the system it's really bad, in part because you need legal advice to get through this process. It's not a straightforward process, as you can imagine. And if your case is refused, you have to go to a tribunal. But one of the things that people don't realize is that 2/3 of all people that apply for asylum, they get it, because they are genuine refugees in need of protection. And the Home Office gives them protection. 2 out of 3. And then another 40% of those that get refused get it on appeal because some information hasn't been shown in the original case or something. So, this whole idea that people are coming for the golden egg and then they they're all bogus, they're all really economic migrants. It couldn't be anywhere further from the truth, right? If you actually look at the data.
Right. So, it's baffling to me that you're not allowed to work. I mean, this might sound like a big
campaign about that. And there has been for a long time because you used to be able to work. In fact, it was the Labour Party, Labour government that ended the right to work. You used to be able to work to be able to support yourself. I think now if your claim isn't determined for a very long time, you can. But of course, you've got no paperwork. They've got nothing to say that you've got legal status to work, so it's very hard to find employment. And if you get employed, you're then going to be exploited by somebody who's going to pay you very little money, et cetera, et cetera. So the whole system, perpetuates inequality, and it perpetuates people, not being able to be legal. I mean, the point is that if people can't work, they may end up working illegally because they need money. And the whole system, from the beginning to the end, frankly, forces people to behave in ways that they don't want to behave because they have to survive it. It's not a good system. I mean, even, if you get refugee status, which is like, finally you're vindicated, you get refugee status, what happens next? You get kicked out of your accommodation. So somehow, you've got to find a flat, you've got to find a deposit, you've got to find your references, all the stuff that's really difficult about finding a flat or a house in the UK, you've got to do from scratch with no work record, because you haven't been allowed to work, no possibility of kind of, integrating society, so you don't even have any references, and you don't have a deposit. And people charge like 2 months deposit now, right? It could be £1,000. So, it's just so much more complicated and painful than people imagine. Lots of people who are really poor and struggling in the UK and feel really marginalised, they feel threatened by these people, but these people are sharing exactly the same crap system as the rest of them, frankly. They're being given a really bad deal, even though they are entitled under international law to be able to do that. So I just wish someone would be honest. I wish governments would be honest about what's going on, because I think it's really unfair to expect people to be sympathetic if they only get their information from these very skewed perspectives of what actually happens. No one leaves their house, their family, their job, their home, their community, their culture, their language for 35 quid on a pay card and a cheap mobile phone. Nobody does that. So, 35 quid to you or me, we'd go into a cafe or something, or we'd, go to the cinema for a night. We don't think twice about it because we're incredibly privileged by comparison. This is not why people come, believe me.
Yeah. So, to be honest, with the work thing is really, really, really just weirds me. Like, not weirds me out, but I'm just confused. Like, also, if I were the Conservative government right now, I would literally be building like an HGV drivers training center at Dover and just like waving people in, being like, come on.
Yeah, there are so many ironies in this. I mean, one of the reasons they stopped people from working was that they had this notion that it was a pull factor, that people were coming to work pretending to be refugees, etc., etc. So, there's all these kind of false assumptions about what's driving people. But then, you've got it's been a while since we touched it. So let's hit the topic of Brexit, shall we? Because Brexit is a classic example of your ironies. So, I mean, we've been talking, you mentioned the HGV situation. A lot of our HGV drivers were European, are European. And, when there was a shortage, they got offered a visa for 8 weeks. Who moves their house and their family for 8 weeks? No one's going to bother. But, this one of the questions that I think people aren't really grappling with is, why are things across the channel so bad now? They weren't this bad 5 years ago. They weren't even this bad 3 years ago. They're bad now. Why are they bad? They're bad because of Brexit. So when the UK left the European Union, it also left the Dublin regulation that I mentioned earlier, which is that regulation that allows people to be sent back to the country that they first came through, right? So Boris Johnson is begging the French to take back refugees and migrants, but we, the UK, withdrew from the regulation that makes that possible when we left the UK and left the EU. So lots of people voted for Brexit on the basis that this would help us to control immigration, right? This was one of the big cards that was played. But in fact, it's exactly the opposite, because the European Union had this Dublin regulation that kind of doesn't always work, and it has all sorts of problems with it. But essentially, it allows countries to return people to another country, which we can't do now under that convention. So there's so many ironies to all of this, because I can't believe that people in these positions of power and with this amount of resource and money can't work this stuff out. Do you know what I mean? It's like, if I can work it out, just sitting at my desk and I'm not in government, how can other people not understand that this is the consequences of their actions? I find it bizarre and, quite frankly, I'm no longer sure whether people are stupid or doing it deliberately. I don't know, because you can't conceive of the fact that people wouldn't have understood this. It seems inconceivable. So that's why Macron's really not having any of it, because the UK withdrew. So you can't have it always. You can't withdraw from some of it and have the bits that work for you. That's not how it works, right? So that's why the French are having none of it, basically.
Is there any country that's part of this Dublin regulation that's not part of the EU?
No, it's an EU regulation. So by definition, you have to be part of the EU.
Okay. So, I assume there's no chance of them granting an exception and including us in it.
Well, I mean, why? Let's imagine we're sitting in France here. Why would the UK be allowed to get away with doing the bits that it wants and not the bits that it doesn't want? I mean, the point is that those countries cooperate and communicate with one another around this legislation, and they have done for 10 years or more. So you kind of can't have it both ways, really, I think. I mean, that's what I'm imagining they'll be saying right now. But I don't know. It just, there are other solutions. There are still other ways of dealing with this. But I just think that the increase in numbers across the channel is, I suspect, because smugglers are telling people, if you get to the UK, you can't be sent back, and they'll be charging them a lot of extra money to be able to do that. Because we know from talking to people about their relationships with smugglers that's what smugglers do. They give them 3 or 4 choices. Well, we can take you to here, we can take you to there, we can take you there. This one will cost this amount. Imagine you're going into a sort of, a travel agency. Which option do you want? This has got a bigger boat, a safer boat. This has got a dinghy. This has got less people on the boat. This is what was happening in the Mediterranean crisis. You can pay €500 to go on this boat with 20 people. If you haven't got enough money, you can pay less money, but there'll be more people on the boat. You've got more chance of dying. I mean, that's the kind of decisions people are having to make. Can I do this? Should I leave somebody behind? Should I try and find some more money? Should I write to my family so I don't have to get on the boat with more people? These are not straightforward decisions, but they're often driven by the kind of financial interests of the smugglers. So, the smugglers basically didn't exist before these policies. These policies create a market for the smugglers. Without these policies, there wouldn't be smugglers because they couldn't make money. And the harder it is to get across the borders, the more money the smugglers charge. So, you want to take away the power from the smugglers? Create some legal entry routes. That immediately means there's no market for the smuggler trade. So, there's lots of different things you can do if you want to. But, there was people think, well, if you do that, then we're kind of giving in to the migrants. No, we're just, having a system that works, which seems to me very sensible. Sorry, I'm sounding increasingly cynical as we go through this conversation because, the more you talk about it, the crassness of it just is at so many different levels.
Well, I mean, it's my belief that at least talking about it helps to at least put the idea in different people's heads that it's not all unsolvable. Like, do you know what people are what these smugglers are charging? Like, what does someone pay for getting across the channel?
I don't know about the channel. I'm sure there's stuff on it, but I just haven't done any work on it at the moment. I mean, in general, in my experience, it's between £1,000 and £2,500 roughly per person. I mean, that's certainly what it was in the Mediterranean crisis, and I imagine it's probably quite high at the moment because although the UK thinks the numbers are high, they're not that high compared to what we've seen in the rest of Europe in the last 5 years. So it's a shorter route. It's more comparable to the Aegean route, across from Turkey to Greece, because that's, if you go, I've been on Lesbos, I've watched people do that crossing. It's about 20 kilometers, I think, in places. So the channel is a little bit longer, but not that much longer. But I know people, so it may be between 500 and 1,000 because it's a shorter route. But as I say, there's all sorts of variables that go into it: size of the boat, how long you've been waiting, whether you've tried before. Lots of different variables go into the price, but it's not cheap. It's a lot cheaper to get on a Eurostar for 60 quid, to put it that way. But of course, those people can't. So
yeah, well, I mean, that would be a little, it'd be a little easier if they could just get on the Eurostar. But
well,
then,
not just in Europe, we're very privileged with our passport in the UK. I mean, we can pretty much go anywhere in the world with, we might have to pay for a visa for 30 quid, but and occasionally it's more difficult. I've been to Russia and, it's slightly more winded process. But basically we can pretty much go more or less wherever we want. It's a very, it's a privilege of birth. It's not anything I worked for. You and I didn't work to get that. We just happened to be born in the right place at the right time. But lots of other people can't. So, they could just get on a normal boat, a ferry, get on a train if there was a system that allowed them to do that, if they could have their cases looked at properly.
Yeah. I mean, so last night when I was watching the coverage of this, and I mentioned this before we started, I was getting a bit frustrated with it, was that they were interviewing a lot of refugees in France who were waiting to hope to come to the UK. There was one guy who said he tried 3 times already and the boat had like capsized or been caught or sent back. And I was like, man, this guy is like seriously determined. Like, unless you were really desperate, like you wouldn't still be trying at that point. But so they were talking to some families, and they were saying that the UK is better for keeping families together. That that there was one or two had mentioned like the English speaking nature of it, like you'd mentioned before. Like, what is the reality here of because I've seen people say, oh, it's about the money. And it's like, well, no, I don't think it's about the money, because the UK gives way less than most other European countries, right? So what is this reason that people are using, or why do they choose the UK? Like, is it, as you said before, like the friends and family connections, or the English speaking part, or is there like a family policy or something that makes it better for families?
It's definitely not a policy. I mean, in general, families do stay together. I mean, I've been doing research on these things for about 20 years, as I said, and the reasons people give you, they may seem quite bizarre to us, but let's say, for example, you are brought up in a country which is an ex-British colony. You went to school, you were taught English, you did your teaching in English, and you learned about, Shakespeare and football and British novels, and none of these things, drive your, it sounds very trivial. They don't in and of themselves drive your decisions. But one of the things people have is a perception. I don't think it's correct, frankly, but people have a perception that the UK is a very tolerant place, a very good place when it comes to justice and human rights, and that if they're going to get an opportunity to build their lives, it's the UK that they're going to do it in. Partly because we've spent several hundred years trotting around the world telling people that that's what we do, telling people we're really good, we're really just and we're really fair and we're really tolerant. we spent a lot of time trying to convince people of that. Again, I'm not convinced that we are necessarily, in the history
It's
of
in the
colonisation.
name, Great Britain.
Say otherwise. Yeah, Great Britain, exactly. I mean, you come into an airport at the moment in the UK and you've got these signs that say Great Britain underneath it. Just like, if you're not confident about something, just because you say it louder and bigger doesn't make it so. Anyway, so I think this, aside from the things that people know about that are familiar, I think there is a sense that this is a country with traditions and values, and that's where they'll get to rebuild their lives. And that combined with the language, combined with, people can't work, they get crap benefits, and the housing is terrible, and the asylum system takes forever. I mean, I can't see that any of those things will attract people. And let's be honest, governments, Labour and the Tories, for the last 20 years have tried to make it as really difficult as possible. One of the things I think is happening potentially is that smugglers are concealing some of this information. So they're basically saying, no, it's fantastic in the UK. So they're reinforcing people's perceptions that this is the best place to be. They don't care whether it is or not. They just want the money. That's what's motivating them. Their motivation is not that this person gets to have a better life. Their motivation is how much money can I make? So I wouldn't be surprised if people are telling them things that are not true. But I mean, most people, particularly at the moment, particularly given how negative things are in the UK around, lots of different things, COVID and Brexit and food shortages and HGV, it doesn't strike you as being a place that people would necessarily, if they knew everything about it, would choose to come. Plus the weather's crap. And I can tell you now, one of the things so many refugees tell us is that they had no idea how bad the weather was. Because if you come from a place,
no way. Is that real?
It's trivial. Damp and cold, and you don't have a coat, and you can't afford heating. These are not nice situations to be in, The idea that it's a party is not true for any of us, least of all if you're in that situation.
Wow. That's amazing. No one told them about the weather. That's a genuine complaint.
It's a genuine complaint. It's a genuine complaint. Well, not a complaint, just a kind of realization of what.
No one told us how much it rains. Yeah, no, I could understand that. To be fair, I mean, and the smugglers, I definitely think is an aspect because, you imagine if someone is selling boat tours on the coast, they're not going to say, it's not worth it. Don't pay the €20 for the boat tour, especially when, if they're charging £500, £1,000.
Yeah,
you're not going to
crap and there's terrible views, are you? You're going to pick it up. It's about to get better. I mean, I was reading something today actually that some of the smugglers are telling people, the channel's not very big. It's like a lake. It's just like a small lake. It'll take you 20 minutes to get to the other side. I mean, people have really no idea. Would you put your kid on one of those dinghies with 20 other people if you thought you were crossing the biggest shipping lane? You wouldn't. No way. None of us would do that. So people are being told things because they're desperate and because they just want to just stop moving. I mean, a lot of the time, people want to stop moving. They just want to get on with rebuilding their lives. People are tired, exhausted. This is not an easy way to spend your life. And as I said at the beginning, lots of people have been moving on for many years. Their kids are getting older, they just want it to be over. And so they're like, okay, fine, we'll roll the dice, the final roll of the dice. And then look what happens, they end up, whatever, just, it's hard to even conceive of that experience. But, 25,000 people have drowned in the waters of Europe since 2014. This is not new. There's been 1,500 people die even the beginning of the year in the Mediterranean. We don't even hear these stories anymore. When we had Lampedusa 6 or 7 years ago, it was big news. It's not news anymore. Aylan Kurdi washed up on a beach. People were very sympathetic for about 3 days, and then they all wanted tougher controls. People's ability to put themselves into that position, to somebody to have to make that decision of, do I sit in this wet, damp tent with no food with my child, or do I put them on a boat and hope we have something better? I don't think people can even conceive of having to make that choice. It's not a choice. No. It's something none of us would ever have to want to do, but that's what people are doing. That's what people are doing. Because the people who have money and have contacts, they come on a plane and claim when they get to the UK. They don't sit on those beaches waiting for a boat.
Yeah. So to sort of move towards wrapping up, the last questions I have are, what if anything, have the UK government proposed as potential fixes? Like, are they just burying their head in the sand? Is there, like you mentioned, talk of moving an office or some sort of, I don't know, facility or people to Calais in order for people to be allowed to legally seek asylum there? Is there like plans for maybe more funding in order to process the things quicker? Is there maybe plans to allow them to work? What have they talked about, if anything?
These are like very sensible ideas, but unfortunately, none are on the table. So the idea of processing the claim in France, that's come from the French. The UK, I'd be very surprised if they'd buy that idea, but that's a French suggestion. I think it's a damn good suggestion, frankly, but I'd be surprised if the British go for it because they say it will act as a pull factor in some way. No, what they've done so far is basically give the French £56 million and said, sort this problem out for us. So put some people on the beach, put some more fences up, do whatever you have to do, but stop them coming. So now Priti Patel is pretty pissed off that the French haven't done that, because in fact, the French can't do that. You cannot legally stop someone from leaving a country. That's not, you can stop people from entering, but you can't stop them from leaving. So the French can't do that anyway, but somehow the British government seems to think they can. And now they're talking about, giving more money to Group 4 security, putting more patrol boats to be able to intercept the boats in the channel. It's all about control and it's all about borders. Nothing's changed. Nothing else is on the table. Safe entry legal routes aren't on the table. Increased resettlement is not on the table. They were talking about sending people to Albania for them to have their claims processed there. And the Albanians said, no, thanks. We're not really interested in that idea either. As I said before, Priti Patel has the idea of wave machines, nets. I mean, these are all just laughable solutions to a problem that is not going away. So the suggestion on the table at the moment that's the best idea so far is the French, suggesting that the British go over there, see if people have got, if you've got kids, like we're talking 12, 13, 14-year-olds sitting in a camp in Calais who have got parents or uncles in the UK with status, why aren't those kids being reunited? It's crazy. So first of all, get out there and see who's got connections, see who's got people already in the UK that they need to be reunited with, let those people in, and then work out from the rest whether or not they have a claim for asylum that should be dealt with in the UK. That's the only way forward right now.
Well, fingers crossed there's some sort of movement on it. I mean, I'm not going to die holding my breath based on what you've said about how long you've been working in this, but we can always hope for things to get better. Thanks.
Though, because it's not going away.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I mean, it would help if we weren't, supplying the weapons or starting the wars ourselves. But
we didn't even go down that route. But yes, there are plenty of other drivers of this that we have some fingers in, I'm sure.
Yeah, unfortunately. But anyway, I really want to thank you for your time. You've definitely given me a much better grasp of what the problem is, and hopefully the people who have listened will have, learned something and got some better understanding of what is actually really happening. So I want to thank you for your time.
Thanks for the opportunity, because it's, as I said before we started, it's rare that you get the opportunity to have this much of a detailed conversation. Normally it's just snippets or little kind of sound bites to try and kind of fit into an existing story. And I think it's great to be able to discuss it in more detail. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, that's what this thing that I'm trying to do is. I don't like the sound bites. I think, we have the ability to make detailed, lengthy conversations. Like, why shouldn't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
But is there anything you want to point people towards of your work or anything before we go?
Well, it depends. I mean, if people want to follow me on Twitter, I often post stuff, including links to work and stuff. I've just done a big Twitter thread on lots of my published work over the last 20 years. It's all free and accessible that people can read. I run this really big project called, forgotten the name of it, MIDEQ. Sorry, MIDEQ. So it's Migration for Development and Equality. It's trying to see migration as a more positive thing. So there's information from mideq.org. But yeah, otherwise people are always very welcome to find me and send me an email. I mean, I always provide people with material or answers. I also get quite abusive emails, but I'm happy to deal with those too. So, so yeah, people are very welcome to be in touch if they want to be.
Okay, well, I will put the links for that stuff in the description below. So thanks very much.
Great. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thanks so much for listening. I really appreciate you tuning in and making it all the way to the end of the show. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.